Lieutenant Jessica Martinez had been working ground radar at Edwards Air Force Base for 3 years when everything changed on a Tuesday morning in October. The desert air was crisp, carrying the familiar scent of jet fuel and hot metal that had become as comforting as her morning coffee. She adjusted her headset and settled into her chair in the darkened control room, surrounded by the green glow of radar screens and the constant hum of electronic equipment. At 26, Jessica had earned her reputation as one of the most reliable air traffic controllers on base. Her voice was steady, professional, and carried just enough authority to cut through the chaos of military airspace. Pilots trusted her completely, knowing that when Jessica Martinez was on duty, they were in capable hands. She had guided countless aircraft through difficult weather, emergency landings, and complex training exercises without a single incident. But today felt different. There was tension in the air that had nothing to do with the weather forecast. Colonel Bradley Thompson, the base commander, had been making rounds more frequently, and word was spreading about budget cuts and personnel evaluations. Jessica tried to push these concerns aside as she began her shift, focusing on the familiar rhythm of incoming and outgoing aircraft. Her first call came from Warthog 37, an A-10 Thunderbolt II piloted by Captain Marcus Rodriguez. She had worked with Rodriguez before. He was competent, if somewhat cocky, and had a reputation for pushing boundaries during training exercises. As she guided him through his approach vector, everything seemed routine. Warthog 37, you're cleared for approach runway 27, Jessica transmitted, her voice carrying the same professional tone she had used thousands of times before. Wind is calm, visibility unlimited. The response should have been immediate acknowledgement, but instead there was silence. Jessica frowned, checking her equipment. Everything appeared to be functioning normally. She tried again. Warthog 37, do you copy approach clearance? This time the response came, but it was hesitant, almost stammered. Ground control, this is Warthog 37. Did you say Martinez? Jessica's heart skipped a beat. There was something in Rodriguez's voice that she couldn't quite place, recognition mixed with something else. Fear, guilt. She maintained her professional composure, though her hands were beginning to tremble slightly. Affirmative, Warthog 37. Lieutenant Martinez on ground control. Please confirm your approach. The silence stretched longer this time. Jessica could hear other controllers in the room beginning to take notice of the unusual exchange. Her supervisor, Technical Sergeant Williams, looked up from his station with a questioning expression. Finally, Rodriguez's voice came through the headset again, but it was different now. The cocky confidence was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like panic. Ground control, I need to speak with you after I land. It's about your brother. The words hit Jessica like a physical blow. Her brother Danny had been killed in Afghanistan 2 years ago, and she rarely spoke about it, especially at work. How could Rodriguez possibly know about Danny? And why would he bring it up now, during a routine landing sequence? Jessica's training kicked in despite her emotional turmoil. She guided Rodriguez through his landing, her voice remaining steady even as her mind raced with questions and possibilities. Whatever Rodriguez wanted to tell her about Danny, it was clearly something that had been weighing on him for some time. As Warthog 37 touched down on the runway, Jessica realized that this conversation would change everything. She had no idea how right she would be. The landing was textbook perfect, but Jessica barely noticed. Her mind was consumed with questions about what Rodriguez could possibly know about Danny's death. She had received the official reports, had attended the funeral with full military honors, and had tried to move on with her life. The official story was that Danny's unit had been ambushed during a routine patrol, and he had died heroically defending his fellow soldiers. But there had always been something that didn't feel quite right about the official account. Small inconsistencies in the timeline, questions that went unanswered, and a general sense that she wasn't being told the complete truth. Her family had accepted the official version, finding comfort in the narrative of Danny's heroism, but Jessica had always harbored doubts. As Rodriguez taxied his A-10 to the hangar, Jessica felt a mixture of dread and anticipation. She had spent 2 years trying to put Danny's death behind her, focusing on her career and trying to honor his memory through her service. Now, it seemed like the past was about to catch up with her in a way she had never expected. Technical Sergeant Williams approached her station with a concerned expression. "Martinez, what was that about?" Rodriguez sounded pretty shaken up. Jessica removed her headset with trembling hands. "I'm not sure, Sergeant. He said he needed to speak with me about my brother. I think it might be related to Danny's death in Afghanistan." Williams nodded gravely. He had been Jessica's supervisor when she received the news about Danny, and he had watched her struggle through the grief while maintaining her professional duties. "Take whatever time you need, Martinez. I'll cover your station." Jessica made her way across the base to the hangar, where Rodriguez would be completing his post-flight checks. The desert sun was beginning to climb higher, casting long shadows across the tarmac. She tried to prepare herself for whatever Rodriguez was about to tell her, but she had no idea how to prepare for the truth that was about to shatter everything she thought she knew about her brother's death. When she arrived at the hangar, Rodriguez was already out of his aircraft, removing his helmet and flight gear. He looked up as she approached, and she could see the conflict in his eyes, a mixture of guilt, fear, and something that might have been relief. "Jessica," he said, using her first name instead of her rank, which immediately told her that this conversation was going to be personal rather than professional. "I've been carrying this for 2 years, and I can't do it anymore. When I heard your voice today, I knew I had to tell you the truth." Jessica steeled herself for whatever was coming. "What truth, Marcus? What do you know about Danny?" Rodriguez took a deep breath, looked around to make sure they were alone, and then met her eyes directly. "Your brother didn't die in an ambush, Jessica. He died because of a mistake, my mistake. And there's been a cover-up to protect my career and the careers of several other officers." The words hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Jessica felt the ground shift beneath her feet as 2 years of carefully constructed acceptance began to crumble. The official story, the hero's funeral, the folded flag, all of it had been built on a lie. "Tell me everything," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Rodriguez began to pace, running his hands through his hair. "I was flying close air support that day. Your brother's unit was supposed to be at a different location, but there was a communication breakdown. When I got the call for fire support, I was given coordinates that I thought were for enemy positions." Jessica felt sick. She was beginning to understand where this was going, but she needed to hear it all. "I dropped my payload exactly where I was told to drop it," Rodriguez continued, his voice breaking. "But those coordinates, they were wrong. Your brother's unit had moved to that position without proper communication up the chain. When I realized what had happened, when I saw the aftermath." He trailed off, unable to continue. "You killed him," Jessica said, the words feeling foreign in her mouth. "You killed my brother." Rodriguez nodded, tears streaming down his face. "It should have been investigated properly. I should have been court-martialed. But Colonel Thompson, he was a major then, he convinced me that covering it up would be better for everyone. He said it would spare your family the pain of knowing it was friendly fire, and it would protect the careers of everyone involved." Jessica felt anger building in her chest like a wildfire, not just at Rodriguez, but at the entire system that had conspired to keep the truth from her family. Who else knew? Thompson, obviously, Major Patterson from intelligence, Captain Brooks from Danny's unit, and a few others who helped coordinate the cover-up. They all got promoted, Jessica. They all benefited from keeping quiet about what really happened. The betrayal cut deeper than Jessica had imagined possible. These were people she worked with, people she had respected and trusted, and they had all been complicit in lying to her about the most important thing in her life. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked. Rodriguez wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "Because I can't live with it anymore. Because every time I fly, I think about Danny and what I did. And because you deserve to know the truth, even if it destroys me." Jessica stood in the hangar, surrounded by the tools and machinery of military aviation, and felt her world completely reshape itself around this new reality. Her brother hadn't died a hero's death in combat. He had died because of a mistake, a cover-up, and a system that valued careers over truth. But as the initial shock began to wear off, Jessica realized that Rodriguez's confession had given her something she hadn't expected, a chance for justice. The people who had covered up Danny's death were still serving, still benefiting from their lie. And now she had the truth. The question was, what was she going to do with it? Jessica looked at Rodriguez, who was waiting for her reaction with obvious fear. She could see that telling her the truth had cost him everything: his composure, his peace of mind, and potentially his career. But it had also given her the most important gift imaginable: the truth about what had really happened to Danny. "I need time to process this," she said finally. "But Marcus, I want you to know that I'm grateful you told me. It took courage to admit what you did." Rodriguez nodded, but he didn't look relieved. "What are you going to do?" Jessica considered the question. She could report what Rodriguez had told her through official channels, but given that Colonel Thompson was now the base commander and had been instrumental in the cover-up, she doubted that would lead to justice. She could go to the media, but that would likely result in her own career being destroyed along with everyone else's. "I'm going to make sure Danny gets the justice he deserves," she said. "And I'm going to make sure that everyone who participated in covering up his death faces consequences." Rodriguez nodded grimly. "I understand. I'm prepared to face whatever comes." Jessica left the hangar with her mind racing. She had always been methodical in her approach to problems, and this situation would require all of her analytical skills. She needed to gather evidence, document everything, and find a way to expose the truth without destroying innocent people in the process. As she walked back across the base, Jessica realized that her life had just been divided into two distinct phases: before Rodriguez's confession and after. The woman who had walked into the hangar 20 minutes ago had been living a lie. The woman walking out was armed with the truth and the determination to use it. The next few days were a blur of careful planning and discreet investigation. Jessica began by researching everything she could about Danny's death, reviewing the official reports with fresh eyes, and looking for inconsistencies. She also started paying closer attention to the people Rodriguez had identified as being part of the cover-up. Colonel Thompson was the most challenging target. As base commander, he had access to nearly everything and the authority to shut down any investigation. But Jessica had one advantage: he had no idea that she knew the truth. She would have to be extremely careful not to tip him off while she gathered evidence. Major Patterson proved to be easier to observe. Jessica noticed that he seemed nervous around her, avoiding eye contact and changing the subject whenever conversation turned to anything related to Afghanistan or combat operations. It was subtle, but Jessica's trained eye picked up on the tells of someone harboring guilt. Captain Brooks was the most interesting case. He had been Danny's commanding officer, and Jessica had spoken with him several times after Danny's death. He had always been kind and supportive, sharing stories about Danny's service and his impact on the unit. Now, knowing what she knew, Jessica realized that Brooks had been feeding her carefully constructed lies designed to maintain the heroic narrative. The betrayal stung, but Jessica channeled her anger into determination. She began documenting everything, creating a timeline of events and identifying the key players in the cover-up. She also started recording conversations, using her phone to capture admissions and inconsistencies that might prove useful later. Her breakthrough came when she overheard a conversation between Major Patterson and Captain Brooks in the base commissary. They were discussing Rodriguez's recent behavior, noting that he seemed more agitated than usual and wondering if he was becoming unstable. "Maybe we should talk to Thompson," Patterson said. "If Rodriguez starts talking, we're all in trouble." Brooks nodded. "It's been 2 years. I thought we were past this." Jessica felt a surge of satisfaction. Not only had she confirmed Rodriguez's story, but she had also identified the ongoing nature of the conspiracy. These men were still actively working to maintain their cover-up, which meant they were still vulnerable to exposure. That night, Jessica called her parents for the first time in months. She had been avoiding them since Rodriguez's confession, unsure how to act normal while harboring such explosive knowledge. But she needed to understand how they would react to learning the truth. "How are you doing, honey?" her mother asked, her voice carrying the familiar warmth that had comforted Jessica throughout her childhood. "I'm okay, Mom. I've been thinking about Danny a lot lately." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "We all miss him terribly, but we have to find peace in knowing he died serving his country, protecting his fellow soldiers." Jessica closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the lie her parents had been living with. What if things weren't exactly as we were told? What if there were details that were kept from us? Her mother's voice became concerned. "What do you mean, Jessica? The Army was very thorough in their investigation. They told us everything that happened." "I know, Mom. I'm just trying to make sense of some things." After the call, Jessica sat in her small apartment off base, staring at the folded flag that had been presented to her family at Danny's funeral. The flag represented honor, sacrifice, and truth, values that had been perverted by the very people who had presented it to them. She made a decision that night. She would expose the truth, regardless of the personal cost. Danny deserved justice, and her family deserved to know what had really happened. The men who had covered up his death had been living comfortable lives while her family mourned based on a lie. Jessica began planning her approach. She would need irrefutable evidence, multiple sources, and a way to present the information that would force an investigation. She also needed to protect Rodriguez, who had shown courage in finally telling the truth. The next morning, Jessica returned to work with a new sense of purpose. She was no longer just an air traffic controller. She was an investigator, gathering evidence to expose one of the most significant cover-ups in her base's history. As she settled into her station and put on her headset, Jessica realized that her voice, which had always been her tool for guiding aircraft safely home, was about to become her weapon for bringing justice to those who had wronged her family. The hunt for justice had begun, and Jessica Martinez was determined to see it through to the end. Over the following weeks, Jessica developed a systematic approach to gathering evidence. She began by creating detailed files on each person Rodriguez had identified as being part of the cover-up. Using her security clearance and access to various base systems, she was able to piece together a comprehensive picture of how the conspiracy had been orchestrated. The most damning evidence came from reviewing communication logs from the day Danny died. Jessica discovered that there had indeed been a breakdown in communication protocols, but it wasn't the random mistake that the official report suggested. Instead, it appeared that Colonel Thompson, who had been a major at the time, had been aware of the unit's location change but had failed to update the close air support coordinates. Jessica also found records of unusual meetings and communications in the days following Danny's death. There were gaps in the official timeline, deleted files, and amended reports that all pointed to a deliberate effort to obscure the truth. Most importantly, she discovered that Rodriguez had initially filed an accurate report about the incident, but it had been revised multiple times before the final version was submitted. The evidence was building, but Jessica knew she needed more than just documentation. She needed witnesses, admissions, and a way to present the information that would force an official investigation. She decided to approach Captain Brooks first, hoping that his guilt might make him more willing to cooperate. Jessica arranged to meet Brooks at a coffee shop off base, telling him she wanted to discuss some questions she had about Danny's service. Brooks agreed, likely thinking it was just another family member seeking closure. When they met, Jessica could see the nervousness in Brooks' eyes. He had clearly been dreading this conversation for years. "Captain Brooks," Jessica began, "I've been doing some research about Danny's death, and I've found some inconsistencies in the official reports." Brooks shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "What kind of inconsistencies?" Jessica pulled out a folder containing copies of the documents she had discovered. "The timeline doesn't add up. The communication logs show that Danny's unit reported their position change, but the close air support coordinates were never updated. Someone knew where Danny was and failed to protect him. Brooks' face went pale. "Jessica, I think you might be reading too much into these documents. Military communications can be complex, and sometimes things get lost in translation." "Captain Rodriguez told me the truth," Jessica said quietly. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Brooks' hands began to shake, and he looked around the coffee shop as if searching for an escape route. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Jessica leaned forward. "He told me about the friendly fire incident. He told me about the cover-up. He told me about your involvement in lying to my family." Brooks sat in silence for a long moment, his internal struggle clearly visible. Finally, he spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "We thought we were protecting everyone. Your family, Rodriguez's career, the unit's reputation. We thought the truth would only cause more pain." "Whose decision was it to cover it up?" Jessica asked. Brooks looked around again, then leaned closer. "Thompson's. He convinced us that it was better for everyone if the official story was that Danny died fighting the enemy. He said it would spare your family the pain of knowing it was friendly fire, and it would prevent Rodriguez from being destroyed by something that was ultimately a communication failure." "But it wasn't just a communication failure, was it?" Jessica pressed. "Someone was negligent. Someone made decisions that led to Danny's death." Brooks nodded reluctantly. "Thompson was the one who should have updated the coordinates. He was the liaison between the ground units and air support. When the communication about the position change came through, he was supposed to relay it to Rodriguez. But he was dealing with multiple situations at once, and he forgot." Jessica felt a surge of anger. Her brother had died because Thompson had forgotten to do his job, and then Thompson had orchestrated a cover-up to protect his own career. "Will you testify to this?" Jessica asked. Brooks looked terrified. "Jessica, if I come forward, my career is over. I have a family to support. I have a daughter starting college next year." "My family has been living a lie for 2 years," Jessica replied. "Danny deserves justice, and the people responsible need to be held accountable." Brooks sat quietly for several minutes, wrestling with his conscience. Finally, he nodded slowly. "If you can guarantee that my testimony will be part of an official investigation, and if you can provide some protection for my family, I'll tell the truth." Jessica felt a surge of triumph. She had her first cooperating witness, and with Brooks' testimony, she would have enough evidence to force an investigation. But she also knew that Thompson would not go down without a fight, and that exposing the truth would likely destroy several careers and potentially put her own life in danger. As she left the coffee shop, Jessica realized that she had crossed a line. She was no longer just gathering information. She was actively building a case that would bring down some of the most powerful people on her base. The stakes were higher than ever, and the consequences of failure would be severe. But Jessica had made a promise to Danny's memory, and she intended to keep it. The next phase of Jessica's investigation required her to be even more careful. With Brooks' cooperation secured, she needed to gather additional evidence that would support his testimony and make the case against Thompson unassailable. She also needed to find a way to present her findings to someone with the authority to launch an official investigation. Jessica's opportunity came when she learned that Inspector General Colonel Sarah Mitchell would be visiting the base for a routine inspection. The Inspector General's office had the authority to investigate allegations of misconduct and cover-ups, and they were independent of the base's command structure. Jessica spent several days preparing her presentation, organizing the evidence into a clear, compelling narrative. She included the communication logs, the amended reports, Rodriguez's admission, and Brooks' agreement to testify. She also prepared a detailed timeline showing how the cover-up had been orchestrated and maintained. The night before Colonel Mitchell's arrival, Jessica couldn't sleep. She reviewed her evidence again and again, looking for any weaknesses that Thompson might exploit. She also thought about what this investigation would mean for everyone involved. Rodriguez would likely face court-martial, Brooks would see his career destroyed, and Thompson would face charges that could result in imprisonment. But Jessica also thought about Danny and about her family's right to know the truth. She thought about the other families who might be affected by similar cover-ups if people like Thompson were allowed to escape accountability. She thought about the military's core values of honor, integrity, and courage, values that had been perverted by the very people who were supposed to uphold them. When Colonel Mitchell arrived the next morning, Jessica requested a private meeting. She presented her evidence methodically, walking through each piece of documentation and explaining how it supported her conclusions. Mitchell listened carefully, asking pointed questions and taking detailed notes. "This is a very serious allegation, Lieutenant Martinez," Mitchell said when Jessica finished her presentation. "If what you're saying is true, it represents a fundamental breach of military justice and a betrayal of the values we've sworn to uphold." "I understand the gravity of the situation, Colonel," Jessica replied, "but I believe the evidence speaks for itself. My brother died because of negligence, and then his death was covered up to protect the careers of the people responsible." Mitchell reviewed the evidence one more time. "I'm going to need to speak with Captain Rodriguez and Captain Brooks. Can you arrange for them to meet with me?" Jessica nodded. "Captain Brooks has already agreed to cooperate. Captain Rodriguez is prepared to tell the truth, regardless of the consequences. And Colonel Thompson, does he have any idea that this investigation is taking place? No, Colonel. I've been very careful to keep this information contained. Mitchell closed the folder containing Jessica's evidence. I'm going to initiate a formal investigation. This will likely result in charges being filed against several individuals, including Colonel Thompson. Are you prepared for what that means? Jessica took a deep breath. Yes, Colonel, I'm prepared. This investigation will also likely end your career here at Edwards, Mitchell warned. Thompson has significant influence, and even if he's ultimately held accountable, there will be people who view you as a troublemaker. I understand, Jessica said, but some things are more important than career advancement. Mitchell nodded approvingly. I agree. I'll be in touch within the next few days to begin formal interviews. As Jessica left the meeting, she felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. She had successfully launched an official investigation, but she also knew that the real battle was just beginning. Thompson would likely fight the charges vigorously, and he would probably try to destroy her credibility and reputation in the process. But Jessica had done what she set out to do. She had honored Danny's memory by ensuring that the truth would finally come to light. Whatever happened next, she could live with the knowledge that she had done the right thing. The investigation moved quickly once Colonel Mitchell took charge. Within a week, she had interviewed Rodriguez, Brooks, and several other witnesses. The evidence was overwhelming, and it became clear that the cover-up had been even more extensive than Jessica had initially realized. Rodriguez's formal statement was particularly damning. He provided a detailed account of how Thompson had pressured him to change his initial report, threatening his career and his family's future if he didn't cooperate. He also revealed that Thompson had orchestrated the false narrative about Danny's heroic death, even going so far as to coach witnesses on what to say to investigators. Brooks' testimony corroborated Rodriguez's account and provided additional details about how the cover-up had been maintained over time. He revealed that Thompson had regularly checked in with the conspirators, reminding them of their mutual interest in keeping the truth hidden. The investigation also uncovered financial irregularities related to Thompson's promotion and the benefits he had received as a result of the cover-up. It appeared that Thompson had not only avoided accountability for his negligence, but had actually been rewarded for it. Colonel Mitchell's final report was scathing. She concluded that Thompson had not only been negligent in his duties on the day Danny died, but had also orchestrated a systematic cover-up that violated numerous military regulations and ethical standards. She recommended that Thompson be court-martialed, and that the other conspirators face appropriate disciplinary action. The report also praised Jessica for her courage in exposing the truth, noting that her investigation had uncovered a pattern of misconduct that might have continued indefinitely if she hadn't taken action. When the report was released, the reaction was swift and decisive. Thompson was immediately relieved of his command and placed under arrest pending court-martial. Major Patterson and Captain Brooks were also suspended pending their own disciplinary hearings. The news of the investigation made national headlines, with military justice advocates praising Jessica's courage and calling for reforms to prevent similar cover-ups in the future. The story resonated with military families who had lost loved ones and wondered if they had been told the complete truth about their deaths. Jessica's parents learned about the investigation through the media coverage, and they called her immediately. The conversation was emotional and difficult, but Jessica felt a sense of relief at finally being able to share the truth with them. "I can't believe they lied to us," her mother said through tears. "All this time we thought Danny died a hero." "He did die a hero, Mom," Jessica replied. "He was serving his country, and he died because someone else failed to do their job properly. The heroism was in his service, not in the circumstances of his death." Her father's reaction was more complex. He was angry about the cover-up, but he also struggled with the knowledge that Danny's death had been preventable. If Thompson had just done his job, Danny would still be alive, he said. "Maybe," Jessica replied, "but we can't change what happened. All we can do is make sure that the people responsible are held accountable." The court-martial proceedings began 3 months later. Jessica testified as a key witness, describing her investigation and the evidence she had uncovered. Her testimony was powerful and compelling, and it helped establish the timeline of events and the scope of the cover-up. Rodriguez also testified, providing emotional testimony about his guilt and his decision to finally tell the truth. His testimony was particularly effective because it demonstrated the human cost of the cover-up, not just for Danny's family, but for everyone who had been forced to live with the lie. Thompson's defense team tried to portray the incident as a tragic accident, and the subsequent cover-up as a well-intentioned effort to spare Danny's family additional pain. They argued that Thompson had been overwhelmed by the chaos of combat operations, and that his failure to update the coordinates was an understandable mistake. But the evidence was too strong, and the cover-up was too systematic to be dismissed as a momentary lapse in judgment. The court found Thompson guilty of negligence, conduct unbecoming an officer, and obstruction of justice. He was sentenced to dismissal from the service, forfeiture of all pay and benefits, and 2 years in military prison. The other conspirators received lesser sentences, but all of them saw their careers effectively ended. Brooks was demoted and given a letter of reprimand that would prevent any future promotions. Patterson was forced to retire early with a reduced pension. For Jessica, the court-martial represented both vindication and closure. She had proven that the truth could prevail, even against powerful people who had spent years trying to suppress it. She had also honored Danny's memory by ensuring that his death would not be forgotten or ignored. But the victory came at a personal cost. As Colonel Mitchell had predicted, Jessica's career at Edwards was effectively over. While she was praised publicly for her courage, privately she was viewed with suspicion by some colleagues who worried about working with someone who had brought down their base commander. Jessica was eventually transferred to a new assignment, where she continued to work as an air traffic controller. She never regretted her decision to expose the truth, but she also recognized that her actions had fundamentally changed her relationship with the military and her career prospects. The investigation also had broader implications for military culture and accountability. It sparked discussions about the need for better oversight of incident investigations and the importance of protecting whistleblowers who report misconduct. Jessica became an advocate for military families and transparency in incident investigations. She spoke at conferences and wrote articles about the importance of truth-telling in military culture. She also worked with other families who suspected that they had not been told the complete truth about their loved ones' deaths. Several years later, Jessica reflected on the events that had changed her life. She realized that Rodriguez's confession in that hangar had given her more than just the truth about Danny's death. It had given her a sense of purpose and a commitment to justice that would guide her for the rest of her life. The experience had also taught her about the power of individual courage to challenge institutional corruption. One person's decision to tell the truth had brought down a conspiracy that involved multiple high-ranking officers and had been maintained for years. Jessica still worked in air traffic control, but she had also become a symbol of integrity and accountability within the military community. Her story was taught in military ethics courses, and her example inspired other service members to speak up when they witnessed misconduct. The folded flag that had been presented to her family at Danny's funeral still sat on her mantelpiece, but now it represented something different. It was no longer a symbol of a lie, but a reminder of the importance of truth and the courage required to pursue it. Danny's real story was finally known, and his death had meaning beyond the false narrative that had been constructed around it. He had died serving his country, and his sister had honored his memory by ensuring that the truth would prevail over the lies that had been told about his death. Jessica's voice, which had once guided aircraft safely home, had become a powerful force for justice. And in the end, that was perhaps the most fitting tribute to Danny's memory, the knowledge that his death had not been in vain, and that the truth would always be worth fighting for. The aftermath of the court-martial continued to reverberate through the military community for years. Jessica's case became a watershed moment for military justice, highlighting the need for better protections for whistleblowers and more rigorous oversight of incident investigations. In the months following Thompson's conviction, several other families came forward with suspicions about their own loved ones' deaths. Jessica worked with military advocacy groups to help these families seek answers, and her efforts led to the reopening of several previously closed cases. The Department of Defense also implemented new policies designed to prevent similar cover-ups. These included independent review boards for all combat-related deaths, mandatory reporting requirements for potential friendly fire incidents, and enhanced protections for service members who reported misconduct. Jessica's personal life had also changed significantly. The stress of the investigation and the subsequent publicity had taken a toll on her relationships, but it had also brought her closer to her family. Her parents, while still grieving Danny's death, found comfort in knowing the truth and in seeing justice served. Rodriguez, meanwhile, had faced his own consequences. He was court-martialed and received a sentence of dismissal from the service and 1 year in military prison. But he also found a measure of peace in finally telling the truth. He maintained contact with Jessica and her family, and he dedicated his post-military life to supporting other veterans struggling with guilt and trauma. The case also had implications beyond the military. It sparked broader conversations about accountability in government institutions and the importance of protecting individuals who expose wrongdoing. Jessica became a sought-after speaker on these topics, and her story resonated with people in many different fields. But perhaps the most important legacy of Jessica's actions was the impact on military culture itself. Her courage in exposing the truth had demonstrated that even the most powerful people could be held accountable for their actions, and that individual integrity could triumph over institutional corruption. Young service members entering the military learned about Jessica's story as part of their ethics training. They understood that they had a responsibility to speak up when they witnessed wrongdoing, and that their voices could make a difference even in the face of overwhelming institutional pressure. Jessica eventually left active duty and transitioned to civilian life, but she remained connected to the military community through her advocacy work. She established a foundation dedicated to supporting military families and promoting transparency in military operations. The foundation provided resources for families seeking answers about their loved ones' deaths, funded research into military accountability, and supported service members who reported misconduct. It became a powerful force for positive change within the military community. Jessica also wrote a book about her experiences, titled Finding the Truth: A Sister's Fight for Justice. The book became a bestseller and further raised awareness about the importance of accountability in military operations. It also provided a detailed account of how individual courage could overcome institutional corruption. In her book, Jessica reflected on the lessons she had learned from her ordeal. She wrote about the importance of persistence in the face of adversity, the power of truth to overcome lies, and the responsibility that each person has to stand up for what is right. She also wrote about Danny, not as the fictional hero of the false narrative, but as the real person he had been, a young man who had volunteered to serve his country and who had died because of someone else's negligence. His real story was more complex than the lie that had been told about him, but it was also more human and more meaningful. The book included a chapter about Rodriguez's courage in finally telling the truth, and about the importance of forgiveness in the healing process. Jessica had initially been angry with Rodriguez for his role in Danny's death, but she had come to understand that his decision to expose the truth had required tremendous courage and had ultimately served justice. Jessica's story continued to inspire others long after the court-martial had ended. Military families facing similar situations reached out to her for guidance and support. Service members struggling with ethical dilemmas sought her advice about how to navigate complex moral terrain. Her work also attracted attention from researchers and policymakers interested in institutional accountability and whistleblower protection. Jessica became a consultant for organizations working to improve transparency and accountability in government institutions. But despite all of the public attention and acclaim, Jessica remained focused on the personal dimension of her experience. She had lost her brother, but she had also gained a sense of purpose and a commitment to justice that would guide her for the rest of her life. The annual memorial service for Danny had also changed significantly. Instead of the generic ceremony that had been held for years, Jessica and her family now organized a more personal remembrance that focused on Danny's actual life and service. The service included readings from his letters home, stories from his fellow soldiers, and reflections on the importance of truth and accountability. Rodriguez attended the service each year, and his presence served as a reminder of the complexity